On the 2nd of March, 1953, in a county courthouse in New Jersey, a woman took the stand and told a judge exactly how much money her husband made. Her husband was sitting in the room. 2 months earlier, in a different courtroom, he had testified under oath that he earned $125 a week as a dealer in scrap paper. She told the court that he made $20,000 a week from the Italian lottery numbers racket El Tichin, that he owned nightclubs, that he owned interests in horse tracks and dog tracks, that he had spent $250,000 on their house. She told the court that the family was involved in narcotics. And she told them one more thing, which is the detail that stops you cold. She said she was the only person who knew the combination to the family safe. The man she was testifying about was Vito Genovese. Within 4 years, he would take control of the most powerful criminal organization in the United States, the family that still carries his name today. He was a man who, by the account of federal investigators, had ordered killings on 2 continents, arranged a murder for the Mussolini government, and would later be accused of putting out a contract on John Gotti. His wife stood up in an open courtroom in front of reporters and itemized his income. Every instinct you have about how that story ends is wrong. Nobody touched her. She lived another 29 years. She worked in nightclubs, then in a Manhattan hotel. She grew old with her daughter and her granddaughter. She died in her own bed in 1982, 13 years after Vito Genovese died in a federal prison hospital in Missouri. And she is buried in the Genovese family plot. That is the ending. Now here is the beginning, and it is worse. Because when Anna married Vito Genovese in March of 1932, her previous husband had been dead for 12 days. He had been strangled on a rooftop in Manhattan. This is the story of Vito Genovese's marriage, and it is nastier than you think. To understand the marriage, you have to understand where he was in 1932, because it was the single most important year of his life. Vito Genovese was born in November of 1897 in a village near Naples and came to New York as a teenager in 1913. He grew up on the streets of Little Italy, doing exactly what every other ambitious young man in that world did: petty theft, extortion, running errands for men slightly further up the ladder. What set him apart was that he attached himself early to Salvatore Lucania, the young Sicilian who would become Lucky Luciano. And he made himself useful in the specific way that gets a man promoted in that business. In 1931, Luciano decided to end the war that was destroying the New York underworld. The first step was the murder of Joe Masseria, shot in a Coney Island restaurant. Vito Genovese was one of the 4 men who did it. Months later, Luciano arranged the death of Salvatore Maranzano and then built the structure that governed American organized crime for the next 55 years. 5 families, fixed territories, and a commission to arbitrate between them. Vito Genovese came out of that as Luciano's right hand, second in command of the most powerful family in the country. At 34 years old, he had also, by that point, been widowed. His first wife had died of illness a few years earlier, leaving him with a daughter, and he had met Anna. Anna was born in 1905, which made her 8 years younger than him. She was already married to a man named Gerard Vernatico, and she had a daughter of her own. What happened next is not disputed in the sense that the sequence of events is a matter of record. What is disputed is the interpretation, and the interpretation only ever came from one direction. On a rooftop in Manhattan, Gerard Vernatico was strangled to death. 12 days later, on the 30th of March, 1932, Anna married Vito Genovese. 12 days. Not 12 months, not a decent interval. 12 days between a man being killed on a roof and his widow standing at an altar with the underboss of the Luciano family. Years later, when Joseph Valachi became the first member of the American Mafia to testify publicly about its inner workings, he addressed this directly. His account, and the account carried by the serious historians of the period, is that Vito Genovese had Gerard Vernotico killed because he wanted to marry his wife. Nobody was ever charged. There is no confession. It has never been proven in a courtroom, and it never will be, because everyone involved has been dead for decades. But that is what Valachi said, and that is what the record has carried ever since. And it means that the central question about this marriage, the one you cannot avoid once you know the timeline, is what Anna understood about how she became available. She never said. In 21 years of marriage and a very public separation in which she said an enormous number of other things, she never addressed it publicly. Sit with that for a second, because everything that follows depends on it. Whatever this marriage was, it began with a corpse on a rooftop and a wedding 12 days later, and both parties spent the next 2 decades acting as though that were a normal way to start a life together. And here is where the story stops being what you expect, because Anna Genovese was not a mob wife in any sense the movies have taught you. She was not at home. She was not sitting in a kitchen in New Jersey, being kept away from the business. She ran nightclubs. Through the 1930s and 40s, she operated venues in Greenwich Village, and by the accounts that survive, she ran them herself, not as a name on a license, but as the person doing the work. And some of them were gay bars, at a time when that meant navigating police raids, licensing law, and social hostility that is difficult to convey now. Some of these operations, according to the research that has been done on her, were run independently of mafia oversight. Her own thing, in her own name. Think about what that required. She was the wife of the underboss of the most powerful crime family in America, and she built a parallel business in a part of New York nightlife that her husband's organization had no particular interest in and could not easily control. That is not a woman who did not know what was going on. That is a woman with her own operation, her own money, her own people, and it explains the single most extraordinary claim she would later make in court, which is that she was the only person who had the combination to the safe. Then, in 1937, Vito Genovese fled the country. He was facing a murder indictment in New York over a killing from 1934, and rather than face it, he took a very large amount of cash and went to Italy. He handed the running of the family to Frank Costello. He spent the war years in Naples, where he became close to the fascist government, financed party operations, and was decorated for it. Federal records indicate he approved the murder of an anti-Mussolini journalist in Manhattan in 1943. When the Allies invaded, he switched sides and worked as an interpreter and liaison for the United States Army, while quietly taking over the black market in southern Italy. He was gone for 8 years. He came back in 1945 in American custody to face the murder charge he had run from. The case collapsed. He walked out. So look at the marriage from Anna's side. She married him in 1932. 5 years later, he disappeared to another continent for 8 years, most of it spent among the men who were running the country the United States was at war with. By 1952, the marriage had reached the point where she went to a lawyer. On the 8th of December 1952, Anna Genovese filed for separate maintenance. The grounds she gave were physical abuse and threats. She said the situation had endangered her health and made her life wretched. That, on its own, was extraordinary. Wives of men at that level did not go to court. There was no mechanism for it, socially or practically. You endured it, or you left quietly and stayed quiet. She went to court. The first hearing was in Trenton on the 20th of December, and it produced the exchange this entire story is built around. Vito Genovese told the court he earned $125 a week as a dealer in waste paper. Anna Genovese told the court he earned $20,000 a week from the numbers racket alone. 125 against 20,000. In the same room, about the same man, under oath. The judge ordered him to pay her $300 a week pending trial. By February, he was facing contempt proceedings for not paying it. And then, on the 2nd and 3rd of March 1953, at the courthouse in Freehold, it went to a full hearing, and Anna Genovese testified in open court about her husband's criminal enterprise. She described the nightclubs, the tracks, the $250,000 spent on the house. She testified that the family was involved in narcotics trafficking. She said she knew the safe combination. Reporters were in the room. It was in the newspapers. You have to understand what that meant in 1953. Joseph Valachi's public testimony, the moment usually described as the first time the American Mafia was described from the inside, was still 10 years away. The Kefauver hearings had happened only 2 years earlier and had mostly produced men refusing to answer. And here was a woman in a New Jersey courtroom naming rackets and amounts. The defense was overwhelming in scale and slightly pathetic in substance. 22 witnesses were produced, testifying largely on Vito's behalf. He took the stand himself and, in broken English, denied that he had ever struck her. And then the family split down the middle, exactly along the lines you would expect. Vito's daughter, his child by his first wife, testified against Anna's account. Anna's daughter, her child by the man who was strangled on the rooftop, testified that Vito had raised his hand to her threateningly. 2 daughters, 2 dead or absent first spouses, each girl defending the parent she came from. At some point during the proceedings, Vito made an approach about reconciliation. He wanted her to come back. A reporter overheard her response as she went past. "He wants me back," she said. "Isn't that a joke?" Both suits were eventually dropped. The marriage did not survive in any meaningful sense, and the accounts differ on whether there was ever a formal divorce or simply a permanent separation. But here is the part that no one can adequately explain, and that everyone who has looked at this case comes back to. Nothing happened to her. She had publicly accused the underboss of an American crime family of running a numbers empire and trafficking narcotics. She had done it on the record, in front of the press, in a courtroom, in the state where he lived. She had humiliated him, not in the abstract, but specifically, by revealing that a man who claimed to be a scrap paper dealer was making $20,000 a week, and she went on living in New York under her married name. Nobody came for her. There is no documented explanation. The obvious theories are unsatisfying. That he still cared for her is possible, but this is a man credibly accused of having her first husband strangled to marry her. That killing her would have brought more attention than the testimony itself is plausible, and probably the closest to right. Or the coldest one, that she knew the safe combination, and men in that position think very carefully before harming the one person who knows where the money is. Whatever the reason, she survived the one thing that world was supposed to make impossible. Vito Genovese went on to have the most consequential decade of his career, and it destroyed him. In 1957, he had Frank Costello shot, but Costello survived and then took control of the family. He convened the meeting at Appalachian to confirm it, and the state police raided it, which is the moment the FBI could no longer pretend the mafia did not exist. In 1959, he was convicted on narcotics charges and sentenced to 15 years. He kept running the family from prison and kept ordering killings, which made him so feared that his own cellmate, Joseph Valachi, became convinced he had been marked for death, killed an inmate he mistook for the assassin, and turned government witness. Valachi's testimony gave America its first complete description of Cosa Nostra from the inside, including the story about the rooftop in 1932. Vito Genovese died on the 14th of February, 1969, of a heart attack at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He was 71. Anna outlived him by 13 years. She worked at a nightclub through the late 50s and into the 60s. Then she took a job in guest relations at a Manhattan hotel, where by her family's account, she became friendly with Cary Grant. By the end of the 60s, she had withdrawn from public life and gone to live with her daughter and her granddaughter. She died of a stroke in 1982 at around 77 years old, and she was buried in the Genovese family plot. That is the last fact, and it is the strangest one. After the rooftop, after the 12 days, after the 8 years he spent in Italy, after she stood in a courtroom and told a judge what he really did for a living, after all of it, she went into the ground with his family. There are two ways to read this marriage, and I do not think anyone can tell you which is correct. The first is the obvious one. A man wanted another man's wife and had him killed, and got her, and beat her, and she got out the only way available to a woman in 1952 with no legal power, and a husband who had people murdered. She used the one weapon the state gave her, which was a courtroom, and she used it well enough that he could not retaliate without making it worse. The second reading is harder to sit with. That she was a partner in it. That she ran her own businesses, kept the safe combination, knew the numbers to the dollar, and spent 21 years inside the enterprise rather than beside it. And that when the marriage failed, she did not flee it, she litigated it, the way a partner would. Both readings fit the evidence. They may both be true at once. What is not in dispute is the arithmetic. He told a judge he made $125 a week. She told the same judge he made $20,000. He died in a prison hospital in Missouri. She died at home, and they buried her with his people.